Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Elayne Allen, and this is a public discourse webinar on Fidelity's future. I am delighted to be joined by four very bright Princeton students and recent alumni. One of them will be late, but before I hand it off to them, I just wanted to introduce our topic, which is Fidelity's future. This webinar comes on the heels of a webinar that was earlier this month on Fidelity that was hosted by Professor Robert George. And he and the panelists had a really remarkable conversation about fidelity and its place in American life and how a renewal of fidelity could really enliven our civic and religious culture in America. And he was joined by an impressive group of panelists. And this webinar, we have younger panelists who will carry the torch of fidelity in their lives and in their careers. So today we're going to talk about what that will look like, what their thoughts are on fidelity to God, to family, to country, and what that will look like in their personal lives and in their future. So with that, we'll go around. So we'll start with Abigail Anthony, and then we'll go to Jaden Stewart, and then Alexandra Orbuck. Am I saying it correctly, Alexandra? Okay. And then Billy Wade will be joining a little bit late, but he will be jumping in the webinar, and he will also give his thoughts on fidelity. So we're going to start with each of the panelists. Abigail, if you can start, and each of you will have 5 minutes to talk about how you think about fidelity conceptually and why you think it's important. And I think everybody here is religious in some way. So you can talk about fidelity in your religion and what you think that will look like in your career. And also I should note before I hand it off to Abigail, RJ Snell, the editor-in-chief, was supposed to be moderating tonight. So for any of the viewers who are confused why I'm the one talking and not RJ, he is at a conference and lost power. So in an act of fidelity to the Witherspoon Institute and Public Discourse, I am carrying the torch. So with that, Abigail, please start us off.
Thank you, Elayne, and hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Abigail Anthony, and I recently graduated from Princeton, and now I currently work as a reporter for the Free Press and National Review. I should note that I'm living in a place with very bad air quality from the fires, so if my voice is a little bit scratchy, I'm very sorry, but I'll do my best to speak clearly. So when I arrived at university, I had almost no exposure to traditional values. I was raised in blue cities, my parents are divorced, and I was never seriously involved in any faith community. Prior to attending university, I was also a professional ballerina. Ballet, like many other fields within the performing arts, has a very high representation of openly gay men. So I grew up in an environment where homosexuality was completely acceptable and freely discussed, even prior to the Obergefell ruling. Before college, I had never heard an intellectual criticism of gay marriage, and more importantly, I had never heard a rigorous defense of heterosexual marriage. I think I can actually pinpoint the precise moment that I became interested in traditional values. All new Princeton students were required to attend the freshman orientation event called Safer Sexpo. There was absolutely no mention of chastity or celibacy. The session operated on the premise that we were going to engage in casual sex, and therefore they distributed condoms to all of us. At the time, I was not equipped with any arguments in favor of abstinence, but I did have a strong instinctive repulsion to this notion of casual sex with someone who wasn't in a committed relationship with me. Thankfully, I later was introduced to counter-arguments because Princeton has a small but mighty conservative cohort of students and faculty. I engaged with intellectual defenses of traditional values by reading works written by some of my own professors, such as Robert P. George and Matthew Frank. I also became involved in the Catholic Association and groups like the Anscombe Society. So rather than providing you with a structured philosophical argument about why you should support Fidelity Month, I wanted to share my brief autobiography so that you realize many young people are receptive to traditional values, yet have never heard them defended. I went from knowing nothing about traditional values and the values espoused by Fidelity Month to later championing those values at a conservative publication. The sad reality is that today we rarely see traditional values represented or even mentioned. I can very easily name a long list of television shows or magazines that celebrate things like polyamory and abortion, but I have a lot of difficulty naming a single pop culture depiction of values like marriage and the sanctity of life. Fidelity Month is a necessary movement so that students with backgrounds like mine can learn about an alternative, more virtuous way of living. And this is a slight digression, but I wanted to mention something from my senior thesis about the temperance movement, which was a shockingly successful moral campaign that we can only aspire to replicate. The temperance advocate J. Wesley wrote in 1834 that drunkards are not so much influenced by those who are like themselves as they are by those who are like you. And then he challenges the temperance reformers with this question: are you willing to have the honor and satisfaction of being one of the instruments of restoring a poor outcast to his friends, to his family, and to his country? I think there's something valuable here that we can apply to Fidelity Month. People will be more influenced by those living virtuous lives rather than those living in moral corruption. And we should perceive it as an honor, not as a burden, to lead these lives. Wesley is not saying that temperance reformers need to burn down liquor shops, but rather just be respectable temperate citizens. Similarly, we need not exhaust ourselves fighting in cultural battles. Rather, we should live virtuously and serve as role models, for it can be so challenging today to find such role models in our popular culture. So thank you, and I hope I provided at least some sliver of hope and encouragement.
Thanks, Abigail. Jaden, do you want to go next?
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for having me today. My name is Jaden Stewart. I'm a rising sophomore at the university, studying politics with minors in classics and economics. I'm from Los Angeles, California originally, and today I'm going to be talking a bit more about what the fidelity crisis looks like among young people. So when I was asked to talk about fidelity amongst young people, I kind of almost laughed, because I was like, there really isn't any. I mean, if you look at just the massive array of cultural ills we see today, all of them sort of suggest that there is no commitment to anything in society. We look at the prevalence of things like pornography usage among young men only continuing to rise, the lack of commitment to any one individual that one wants to pursue a relationship with. We see we see the continual endorsement and the continual reliance upon things like social media, the need for likes, the need for that sort of external stimulation amongst our young people. And we question, why are our young people today so needing of these temporary things? And I think that it's because all of the traditional values, all of the traditional institutions that we previously relied upon for support, for positive affirmation, has sort of been stripped away from us. And so we can kind of talk about what that looks like. So I think each of the things that Fidelity Month is calling us to espouse, God, family, and country, all tend to have a sort of dark counterpart that we see very prevalent in society today. So the first is family. And what do we tend to replace family with now? In my opinion, we tend to replace it a lot with our careers, because many individuals, when you ask them, even if you ask Princeton students like, hey, are you thinking about having a family? Are you thinking about settling down, having kids? Most of their answers is no. They think it's too inconvenient and they'd rather go work a 45-hour a week, 45-hour a day or whatever, working insane hours for Goldman. It's very odd to see the tense commitment that our students are really willing to place upon things like career, because they think that there's value in that. They think they're going to get some sort of social prestige, some sort of fulfillment in it, as opposed to things like family, as opposed to the strong bonds you're able to form with other people there. The next sort of value that Fidelity Month is really supposed to represent is God. And we can see that a lot of these things are sort of have been replaced by social justice movements, by wokeness, this idea and this need to feel some sort of social righteousness over other individuals. I mean, say what you want about the individuals at West Princeton and all of the values they hold that may or may not be correct, but one thing that you have to give them is that they are tremendously committed to what they are doing. And I think that this is very true for many individuals on the left, that this has become their religion, that they need to feel this sort of moral superiority to sort of mask the fact that they have this deep darkness inside of them. And then I think for country, there really isn't a particular counterpart. And I think that's very intentional, because we can't be reliant upon other sort of larger organizations beyond ourselves that have positive values, that have the values like freedom and independence that America has. Because when we do that, we realize how empty the career, the wokeness, all of these things that have been pushed down our throats in elementary school, high school, university, all of those things, we realize all of them tend to fall short in comparison to the joy that we can receive in conjunction with other individuals. So with the time I have left, I want to talk about how we can actually sort of fix this. Abigail did a great job sort of talking about the individual efforts that we must put in order to truly see this change. So I'm going to elaborate a bit more on that. I think it's truly encouraging for me to see that there are this many people here, that there's many people willing to take time on a random Thursday night to listen to a bunch of 18, 19, 20-year-olds talk about what it means to have Fidelity, because I think that shows how much value all of you are placing upon it, and that truly inspires me to continue to push for these sorts of values day in and day out in our lives. And I think there's a few sort of things that each of us can do to address these issues. The first is, I think, establishing strong families. Our presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy has a great line saying that the family is the greatest form of governance known to mankind. And I think that this is an absolutely true statement. Once we have strong families, you're able to teach your kids, you're able to teach your relatives, that fidelity is a value and something worth preserving and worth fighting for. And I think that once we're able to do that, we're better able to exhibit the benefits of it in the public square. Unfortunately, this is a movement that legislation is going to fix. We can't just sort of, legislate our way into this sort of progress. It's going to take individual effort from every single one of us in order to truly have the impact we want to see. So I'm just going to leave you guys with this quote from Robert F. Kennedy. It's one of my favorite quotes. Each time a man stands up for an ideal, or acts to improve the lot of others, or strikes out against injustice, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope. And crossing each other from a million centers of energy and daring, those ripples build a current that can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. Our future may lie beyond our vision, guys, but it is not completely beyond our control. Keep fighting, keep working. Thank you guys so much for having me.
Thanks, Jaden. That was great. Alexandra?
Sure. And I want to echo Abigail and Jaden in saying thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here tonight. And to be with so many people who are really thinking about the importance of fidelity and are looking at, our larger societal context and are not too happy with what they're seeing and really do want to make a change. So a little bit about me. I'm a rising junior at Princeton studying history. And on campus, I run the Tory, which is a conservative journal, and excited to be here with my predecessor, Billy Wade. So big shoes to fill in that department. He did such a fantastic job running the journal before me. But I guess what I want to start with, which I think is a really great jumping off point from what Jaden was talking about, is the importance of fidelity to family. And I really do think that the notion of extended family and of intergenerational links play into this so deeply. And I mean, I grew up living just a few blocks away from my grandmother and my great aunt. And I had, you have multiple generations sitting at a Sabbath table. And I think there's so much value in that. And it shaped me so deeply. And I grew up in a very strong Jewish community and a religious one. And I think in Judaism, community is just such a central value. One of the great sages, Hillel, who's very well known, says, and this is in Hebrew and I'll translate in just a moment, so don't worry, for those who don't speak Hebrew out there, al tifrosh min hatzibur, you're not meant to separate from the community. It's something that is spoken about so much, in where I grew up and in that cultural context. So it was a bit of a shock coming to Princeton. I think not because I hadn't been in secular environments before, I had, but I think I just was able to see on a much more magnified scale how unmoored today's youth is from the stabilizing network of community. And coming into college, I mean, I think it's sort of known that you walk in, you're a young person on a college campus, you don't really know anyone. It's kind of this, vast abyss before you. And for me, what really helped get into the swing of things and get used to campus life in this new stage in my life was the Jewish community at Princeton. And looking around and seeing people who maybe didn't have that kind of stabilizing force, I think really made me grateful for what I grew up with, but also very much aware that that value is not very mainstream among today's youth, like both Jaden and Abigail were talking about. And I think what's really interesting, because something that Professor George talks a lot about, and what was a little bit of the jumping off point for Fidelity Month, was this recent Wall Street Journal poll that shows, the decline in values that have really defined America for so long, and religion, family, patriotism. And so I really do, I do believe that we can get back there. Maybe that's optimistic of me, but not if we're complacent and we let our country continue to go, on the path that it's currently on. And so I think that if we take stock, of what's important, and I think all of us here today realize what's important. That's why, like Jaden said, we're here on a random Thursday, that we can make change, but we have to be much more action oriented and not complacent.
Thank you, Alexandra. Billy, welcome. We are going around giving introductions of ourselves and telling everyone about how we think about Fidelity, how it plays out in our own lives, but also conceptually how we conceive of it. So please go ahead.
Yes, of course. And thank you so much for having me. This is a wonderful opportunity. And thank you to my my Princeton peers and friends who are also on this panel. This is so wonderful to see you guys. As way of introduction, my name is Billy Wade, and I was a member of the Princeton class of 2023, so just recently graduated. And at Princeton, I was the former editor-in-chief of the Princeton Tory, which both Alexandra, Abigail, and Jaden have all been involved with. And I was also a member of the varsity basketball team. Now, when it comes to Fidelity Month focuses on a few different topics, from fidelity to God, to family, to country. And so in the couple minutes that I have, I'd like to make 3 different points in regards to 1, fidelity generally, 2, fidelity to truth, and 3, fidelity to country. First, fidelity is an action word. In medieval Europe, knights would swear fealty to their lords and their lords to their kings. This is more than a symbolic association, but required proactive action from those who swore oaths to defend their community. Similarly, as we consider fealty to God, family, and country, we must remember that such commitments are not passive. If we are to be filial to our God, families, and country, we must be ready to act in their best interests. Second, fealty to truth is not easy, but we can always depend on objective truth to remain true and steadfast. One of my favorite biblical episodes is when Peter joined Christ walking on water. The story goes, Peter saw Christ walking on water and had enough faith to follow him in that miraculous act. However, after some time, Peter became afraid because of what the scriptures call winds boisterous around him. A tempest had emerged. As a result, he lost his focus on Christ and sank into the water before being pulled back up by his Savior. Similarly, it's hard to follow what is true, particularly in times when proverbial winds boisterous seek to cause serious moral commotion in our time. I don't envy current teenagers and college students who pass through a constant deluge of moral relativism and half-truths because our education system and today's popular ideas. For this reason, institutions like the Fidelity Network are so key to remaining steadfast in modern moral tempests. Third and final, on fidelity to country. Unlike fidelity to truth, where we can choose whether or not to follow it, we cannot choose where we are born, and few have the opportunity to immigrate to another nation than where they are born. Fidelity to country requires a sense of patriotism, a commitment to the betterment of your community at both a local and national level. I interrupted my Princeton education to serve a 2-year mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Like all nations, Brazil faces many challenges: poverty, crime, and the breakdown of the family, to name just a few. Despite this, I was so impressed by the patriotism of the Brazilian people. They did all they could in whatever setting they found themselves to improve their community. One older gentleman I knew went out of his way to provide Christmas dinners to dozens of single mothers who rarely had extra cash on hand for anything than basic sustenance. As I see it, that gentleman demonstrated true fidelity to his community. But a commitment to our communities can mean more than providing material assistance. Loyalty to truth compels us to promote and protect it in both public and private venues. This means seeking truth for ourselves, teaching truth to those around us, and advocating for those causes that align themselves with truth. So in summary, fidelity is more than an idea, it is an action word. We must remain steadfast in the midst of moral confusion and proverbial winds boisterous. And lastly, fidelity to country asks each of us to protect truth wherever we may live. Thank you so much for this opportunity to be here.
Thank you, Billy. I want to remind the audience that we have a Q&A portion that we're going to get to at the end of this conversation. So if you see the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, that's where you can start submitting questions. One thing I wanted to ask you guys about is loneliness, especially amongst the young today, because I think all of you, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think all of you during your college years, it coincided with COVID-19. So you lived in a time of profound disruption, or most of you at least. I think Jaden, I saw him shaking his head, but even if that wasn't the case, I mean, we've all lived through COVID-19 and we've all experienced loneliness and isolation and less social life happening. Communities aren't what they once were, and religious participation is in decline, especially amongst millennials and Gen Z. And so I'm wondering if you can address in your mind how you think fidelity might correct some of the social isolation we're experiencing. I think I think every one of you or most of you mentioned your faith background and your family background, and how those experiences and fidelity playing into those things helped address the loneliness crisis that we're seeing. I think fidelity addresses a lot of things, but especially for the young who might wonder, what does fidelity have to do with my life? You know, maybe it can help them address maybe it can help them think about how to reconnect with people after times of loneliness, spending time online. So anyway, I'd love to hear what you guys think about that.
I think.
Go for it, Jaden. Go for
Okay,
it.
cool. So I think when a group of individuals come from a common faith background and a common nation, what tends to happen is they tend to have a set of common values. And I think it is significantly easier to form connections amongst individuals who have those common values, right? I think that the most important values are sort of the ones that are based in truth, like Billy had mentioned, the ones that are clearly established by like natural law, by God, things like that. And I think that once we're able to meet people who have those connections, and oftentimes through faith backgrounds, through the nation, and through, I think, particularly families, we're best able to sort of address the loneliness issue.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely just echoing off of that. And, I was lucky enough, I took a gap year studying in Israel. So I missed the worst of COVID, which I'm very grateful for. And so I think, maybe Abigail and Billy would be able to speak more to this than myself. But for me, at least, I mean, I grew up in New York City and I moved to Los Angeles in high school, sort of two coasts that I think very much you see the exacerbation of a lack of fidelity. And so a lot of people ask me how I came to the views that I currently have, given the areas I grew up in. And I think that's a whole another conversation. But one thing that I really found vital for me, because I was maybe 15, moving across the country, a new school, a completely new type of background. And what really should have been a time, I think, of deep loneliness in comparison to other parts of my life was the exact opposite of that. I mean, I came to Los Angeles and I remember just being so overwhelmed by the warmth of the Jewish community, and just coming, home on the first or second day, having moved, and, 5 or 6 little welcome to the neighborhood gifts outside of my door and invitations for Shabbat meals for, it must have been 2 months, you know, in like week after week, from when we had first moved to the neighborhood, all orchestrated by the rabbi of our community and different families involved. And I think to me, that was just a moment in my life where I realized how important community is to combating loneliness. And I think too, this element of responsibility and obligation to something larger than yourself, where, you know, there were people who, right, they dropped brownies off at our door, and then those same families, if they experienced a loss, there would be a meal train that the community would come together on to help them through that difficult time. And I think when you have these strong bonds, you know, that's what's really important to fighting something like loneliness and the alienation and individualism that we really see growing among America's youth.
I was enrolled here at Princeton when we had about a year and a half of online school due to Zoom, or due to COVID. And I think the policies across the country and at different institutions can reveal why Fidelity Month is so necessary, because we saw the devaluation of religious groups and religious institutions and religious gatherings. For example, at Princeton University, students were required to sign a social contract saying that they wouldn't gather in groups larger than 10. However, the university allowed an anti-racism protest to go on without any sort of obstructions or punishments after, yet the same week the Catholic students weren't allowed to gather in the chapel for Easter Mass. And so I think this isn't an argument as to how Fidelity cures the loneliness, but the whole COVID scenario across the country and even the world can show that we are in a place where the Fidelity Month is so necessary, because we've seen how our institutions have no faith in faith, and they are just not at all interested in supporting religion and allowing it to flourish. And so we really do need some sort of social movement to bring attention to the value of religion and the value of religious gatherings.
Yeah, and then if I could just add, I love everything that the other panelists have said, and I don't want to add too much more, but just that I actually feel for those who do not believe in objective truth or do not hold that, because at least what I've seen a lot is a lot of that loneliness has come from trying to understand what one's own identity is. You know, people are told that, oh, your gender is exactly what you feel it is on that particular day. And once that is opened up to you as, no, I can actually choose that on a day-to-day basis and according to my feelings, that's hard. And I can only imagine how lonely so many of my peers have felt in those moments when they're trying to just grasp, who am I when I look in the mirror? There is so much comfort in objective truth and in that pursuit thereof.
Yeah, that was all great. Thanks, everyone. To dovetail off of Billy's last comment, all of you are people with a religious background, and I assume in all of your lives, fidelity to what your faith teaches has been something that's been freeing and been an important pillar of your day-to-day life, if not, hopefully, the most important pillar of your day-to-day life. So I'm wondering, you've all alluded to this, but it doesn't seem, and data doesn't point to fidelity to religion being something that most young people prioritize or something that they really are concerned or care about. And yet in each of your lives it is. So I'm wondering, how can we get others to see that this is actually something that's not oppressive or a constraint on your identity, but something that allows your identity to flourish, fidelity to God? Is that something that needs to happen internal to your church, to your religion? Does there need to be some kind of external, policy, communal revival? What in your mind does that look like based on your experiences on campus and socializing with other young people?
I mean, if I could start, I think from a Jewish perspective, what was so formative for me was education. And I think the schools, especially schools for young children and religious schools, really are a pillar. And I really don't think there's a substitute for that. I think there are definitely, and you know, my own mother didn't grow up in the Orthodox Jewish community, but she sort of found it later in life, and she ended up majoring in Judaic studies when she was at the University of Michigan, and it was sort of the beginning of her religious trajectory. And so it definitely does happen later on. I'm not dismissing that in any way, and everyone's journey is different. But I think, at least, and I can only really speak to my own personal case, it was so formative for me to be around inspirational religious teachers growing up, and to have that, I think, love of Judaism, love of Jewish texts and Jewish lifestyle, because I really do believe that kids are always watching and always listening, and they see the people around them, and especially the people they respect, and they want to be like them. And I remember looking up so greatly to my rabbis and teachers growing up, and I still do now. And I think that's where I got a lot of the values that I hold most dearly. And so I really do believe education starting young. But even, you know, my gap year in Israel was really a formative experience for me as far as Jewish learning and access to leaders in the faith. And I know Billy went on mission during his college years, and he's told me amazing stories about that, and he can speak to that much better than I can. But I think touch points like that really do make such a difference.
So I wasn't particularly devout before coming to college. My freshman fall, I became friends with someone who was in the Catholic group, and he invited me to Mass, and I thought, oh, these people are like really nice and not social climby. So I kept going, and it wound up being one of those people who goes to daily Mass. So I often joke that I came for friends but stayed for Jesus. And I think, quite frankly, you don't have to be particularly religious to benefit at all from a religious community, especially at an environment like Princeton, which is very, very high stress. I know students who will say something like, oh, I couldn't possibly go to Mass or a service because I have all this work that I'm just so obsessed with and I keep thinking about it. And my response to that is something like, well, what better way to aid your schoolwork than to sit in a beautiful chapel for an hour, listen to these amazing choir, hear something inspiring, see some friends, chat for a few minutes. It just seems to me that you could hypothetically sit there, not believe anything, you could disagree with all of it, and yet still really benefit from the social environment. And I think this goes back to your earlier question, Elayne, about loneliness. I think that religious communities, regardless of what they believe, are ultimately communities, and we need communities. We are social animals. We really require that. And so I think stressed out undergrads should go to church, go to Mass, go to a service. I've been to Shabbat, loved it, didn't understand any Hebrew, but it's great. It's so just invigorating.
Yeah, I really loved what both Alexandra and Abigail said. And I think I'll just add that one of my favorite quotes is from St. Francis of Assisi, when he said, preach the gospel at all times, when necessary, use words. And so when I think about how us as like individuals can inspire the idea that, hey, religion is not necessarily this big, scary, oppressive thing, is people pay attention to how religious folk act. They really do. And if you are kind, if you are charitable, if you deal with people in ways that make other people think, wow, that was kind of impressive, and I want to be more like that, and they look happy. Why is that? I think those are the things, just like Abigail said, you come for the friends and then you stay for religion, whatever that may be.
Yeah, just echo what everyone else has said. I think that the religious communities are truly some of the most powerful tools we have in order to A, help ourselves, and B, help the world. I've been just tremendously blown away by the absolutely welcoming nature of people in the Christian communities at Princeton, whether it's Nova or Princeton Christian Fellowship, with which I'm a member of. It's truly been inspiring to sort of see the commitment that everyone has to their faith. And I think that's also pushed me to do more prioritize faith a lot more in my life. And like Abigail said, I think the best way to help stress undergrads is just give them an opportunity to rest. And I think that you find ultimately true rest in a community with people who are you enjoy being with them, and you enjoy, what they're doing, and you enjoy the environment. And I think that's been really good for me. One of the true benefits that I've seen from my friends is sort of on taking Sabbaths. So all of my friends have basically, the beginning of the year, sort of strung on me into like taking Sundays off from doing work. And now it's one of the best things that I could possibly do. It's truly a day of rest for me. And it's been able to really energize me going back at the beginning of the week. And I really recommend that anyone, try doing that.
Thanks, guys. These are really thoughtful responses. I'm going to go ahead and turn to audience Q&A because we've started getting quite a few. One listener asks, so it seems that at times that very few people actually adhere to traditional values. But even worse, they don't even hold to basic logic or belief in objective truth at all. So as smart young people who have a sense of, what other younger people are thinking, how they approach the world, their basic presuppositions, how do you think, I think some of your comments had addressed this already, but if you can just think about it head on, how do you think we can spread the message of fidelity under these circumstances where basic commitment to logic and belief in objective truth isn't there? Is there some foundational work that needs to be done before something like Fidelity Month can really take off?
I think this is Professor George's line, which I'm stealing, but he says something like, what if it's true that there's no objective truth? And then all the people arguing against him will like shake in fear because they've never considered that. So I think it's not a particularly difficult argument to counter. With that said, I don't necessarily think Fidelity Month is a combative, argumentative movement. I think all of us touched on being role models and sources of inspiration. I think just being a devoted spouse is in many ways advancing fidelity. That seems almost rare. And to someone like me with divorced parents, like I draw sort of inspiration from that. And I don't have a particularly or really at all a good model of marriage to look up to. And so I look to other couples to see like, how would I want to be a good wife? And so we're not necessarily saying you need to go buy a bunch of merch, although you should. And we're not saying you need to like go march and like wave the flag every day. I think these sort of humble and genuine actions will inspire others and they will want to live like you, whether that's just being a good neighbor and doing something very simple or going to your church and participating in the choir or something like that. I think there are many simple ways that you can commit service very, very easily and daily.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that Abigail has said. And touching upon something Billy said before, I really do think that person-to-person interaction is everything, because you coming onto a college campus, you're meeting people of all sorts, and you could be the first devout Catholic that somebody has ever met in their life, the first devout Jew. And so even if you're just kind, or you invite them to your faith space for a dinner or a learning opportunity, for them just to see how you live, it might not even make them want to live like you, but it may make them see the beauty in your way of life, especially if they're coming into that first interaction, maybe with skepticism of religion, of your particular religion, of religion in general, whatever it may look like. And so I really do think that what you do on an individual scale, like Abigail was saying, it really does matter.
I think those were wonderful comments. I think I'll just add that ultimately we're all imperfect vessels of truth. At one point or another, we're all hypocrites. We say one thing and we end up doing another. And so the worst thing we can do is to give the impression to others that we are higher or mightier than they are, particularly those who may not believe in the same conception of objective truth as us. And from there, from that humility, using dialogue, using discussion, getting to know them, because ultimately truth can speak for itself as long as we put ourselves in a position where they are not closed-minded.
Yeah, to sort of jump off of what Billy said, I think the most important thing that we can do is sort of show that we are different, and whether that's saying that, hey, we have this unique peace, this unique contentment that we receive from the faith communities we're part of, or whether it's saying, hey, we have this joy that we have because we're able to have such a good time with friends and with community. I think that all of those are such great things. I think the most important thing that I've sort of learned from interacting with individuals with various experiences of faith is to just have a lot of patience with them. I think that a lot of people who have turned away from faith tend to have very negative experiences, and those tend to be very institutional things, on like a church by church, synagogue by synagogue level. And I think it's really important for us to try to understand what happened and point them in the right direction, not necessarily tell them like, hey, like you need to believe X, Y, and Z, but be that sympathetic shoulder for them and really try to show them love and compassion. I think that goes a long way.
Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. We have a lot of listeners, I think, who want to hear specifically about your experiences on campus. Abigail, you've touched on some of that, but if there's anything else you want to elaborate on, and everybody else too. So one of the listener asks, what are some of the challenges to Fidelity that you've experienced as a student where your traditional values have cost you in some way, or you've maybe even been threatened by that? And have you had to self-censor? And I guess I would add on to that. And given those experiences that you may or may not have had, what were some good productive ways to respond, and how can you build a culture on campus where fidelity is something that's more cherished and welcome amongst students? There's a lot there, so feel free to pick up on part or all of that, however you see fit.
So I would say it's not exclusively the values espoused by Fidelity Month that face hostility on campus. I would say it's pretty much every sane view from like 5 years ago is like somehow unspeakable now. And for example, I think views on gender and this concept of gender, it's very difficult to criticize without facing some kind of social punishment. And I don't think anyone had ever really talked about gender prior to 2016, maybe. And so it's not necessarily espousing religious views or your patriotism that is enough or sufficient to sort of subject you to some sort of social consequences. In my own 4 years, I worked as a journalist part-time, and I did not shy away from writing articles, either reporting or opinion. And I did that because I realized that what I was experiencing every day and seemed so obvious to me was really shocking to alumni. They're not on the grounds and they have no idea what's going on. And I sort of felt the sense of obligation to just get the word out. And of course, I did face some criticism from peers and some threats in some instances, but I also had many, many wonderful opportunities, and I have a wonderful job now, and I'm going off to grad school. So you're not necessarily excluded from academia for sort of dissenting from the academic norm. And so I hope that young students can sort of look up to some of the students on this call or at other campuses and say like, oh, it is possible to be conservative or espouse traditional values without being sent to like the institutional gulag. Like you can thrive socially and professionally. And so I think professors can sort of lend more of a hand here and help elevate those students, whether that's connecting them for internships or writing good letters of recommendation and that sort of thing. I think alumni here can also be a big help. They can donate money or not donate money to like the anti-traditional value places. And so I think there are there's definitely a lot of room for improvement, but I would say to any student who's currently on campus or about to go to campus, if you have traditional values, don't shy away from saying those. You hold those values because you think they're true and good, and why would you want to hide those from someone? And just, be aware it's not the end of the road for you. You can thrive, and it might not be the way that you imagined you would thrive, but rededicate yourself to God as Fidelity Month espouses, and really have faith that everything will work out fine.
Amen to that. And I'm just going to add one thing, which is to those conservative students who are going off to campus, be friendly. Go and make friends, even with people who may staunchly disagree with you. My freshman year, I was actually in the Princeton Glee Club and in total arts scene, and it was awesome. I loved it. And very, very few of my friends, if we were to talk like real serious, like what values we hold, we probably could not have diverted more. But I still cherished those friendships because there were still things I got to learn from them. And over time, there were moments when they would be a support to me, or I would be a support to them. And I would be able to explain my beliefs more over time. And well, I can't say that I've won any converts to our cause. I do think that some hearts have been opened.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with both of what Abigail and Billy has said. And I think just one thing that I would add would be to college students out there who are just coming to campus, look for people, for mentors, people you look up to who are saying maybe what you're thinking. You might not have to agree with them 100%, but look for somebody who you want to be in a year, in 2 years, because I remember coming to Princeton and in high school, my close friends knew my political affiliations, my family did, but I was silent about it on my college applications because I genuinely did think it would hinder me. And coming to campus, I was not even thinking about espousing my views publicly. And now I run the Conservative Journal. So that plan obviously went awry, but it's because I had people like Billy and Abigail to look up to and who spoke to me about what it was like to really put your views out there, and seeing real flesh and blood people like them, going out and being able to live in the world. And they were having fantastic college experiences, sure, with, hindrances, definitely. And I'm not going to say that these aren't heterodox views sometimes that we espouse on larger campus that doesn't tend to agree with at least most of, what I hold to be true and dear. But I do think that you really can flourish. And I've learned that, but it's definitely something that's counterintuitive to what I would have believed coming in to campus. So I would say to older students, look for the freshmen coming in and help them become what you've become and be able to speak their truth. And I think to younger students, look up to people who are just a little bit ahead of you on that life trajectory, and don't be afraid to, speak your truth.
I think from my experience, people sort of tend to have a polluted view of what actual conservatism and traditional values look like. When I've sort of broached people on various subjects from traditional values, I tend to find that a lot of them think that I am going to approach things like Ben Shapiro. And the problem is most of us, if not all of us, are not Ben Shapiro. We don't think that the primary aim of every conversation is to have some sort of viral moment to throw on YouTube, and that's a great thing for him, and I think there are benefits to that. But when you're having a real conversation with real people, I think that one of the most important things that you can do is just sit down and be a genuine person and like clearly express like, this is what I believe and this is why I believe it and these are my experiences. And then you listen to them and you hear out their experiences, you have a real conversation with them. And I think that I found that most people are willing to do that, even if we walk away and we don't agree on anything. And those have been some of the most profound and impactful experiences I've had during my freshman year. It's just sitting down and really reaching an understanding with people. And I think that once that happens, people are able to see the benefits of fidelity, benefits of being loyal to God, to family, to country. And I think that's something that we should really continue to do in the future.
So turning from your experiences of fidelity on campus and the successes and challenges that have come with that, now that all of you are graduated or maybe will be graduating in the next couple of years, how do you think about Fidelity for the rest of your life, the rest of your life's trajectory, and your career? How does fidelity to country, to your family, to your faith inform how you approach your career, and how you just live your life generally, how you approach your relationships? And we also have a couple of questions about implementing the word and spreading the word about Fidelity Month specifically. So if you have any thoughts on how you as an individual will do that, and advice for listeners who want to fly their Fidelity flag high and spread the word about it, that would be great too.
I can go first. I mean, as far as, putting the flag up, I mean, I think that takes great courage, certainly. And what's been interesting for me being at Princeton, which I definitely think I'll take with me, is that sense of, I think, like Jaden was pointing to, being a genuine person, which also means for me, not always saying what I want to say, no matter how much I sometimes do want to say it, especially in the context of a college campus where my views, are not exactly always in line with the traditional majority, using traditional not in the sense that we've been talking about it here. I really think that being able to sit down and listen, I think it was Winston Churchill who said it takes courage to stand up and speak, but it also takes courage to sit down and listen. And I think that that's been very true for me on Princeton's campus, and it's something that I'll take with me, and the value of really listening to others, because whether, my goal is to change hearts and minds in one conversation or not, I think there's a real importance of just person to person interaction and listening to others, and being that type of role model, or just an expression of what it means to be a God-fearing person, someone for whom fidelity is an important value. And so I think being able to listen to others' perspectives is something that's been so vital for my own experience, and something that I'll definitely take with me as I move on in life. Although I do have 2 years left, so I'm not quite done with Princeton yet.
So working in journalism, I definitely try my absolute best to make sure that everything is completely accurate, and also that the language is precise and fair. And I think journalists who don't strive to do that aren't journalists. I think they're activists, really. And so I think the sort of aims of Fidelity can fit very nicely into the profession that I work in. And then I also, when I write my articles, I try not to write them in a manner that sort of espouses or like leads the reader to one specific conclusion. I try to really sort of provide all the facts and let people be free thinkers. And if they sort of agree with the thing that's being covered, or if they absolutely hate it, then that's completely up to them, and I respect that entirely. And so I think fidelity, it's sort of rededicating ourselves to our families, our countries, our communities, our God, but it's also to sort of co-opt a word from what's usually the sort of the other side of the political spectrum, sort of like this inclusive movement. Like, it isn't divisive, it really is working towards a positive vision, and it really does respect freedom of thought and freedom of religion. This is not a uniquely Catholic or LDS or Jewish movement, as you can see from this call. And so I think when we're trying to implement fidelity in our careers, that sort of can fit more nicely into some careers than others. But I think all of us can practice sort of the aims of fidelity in our everyday interactions by really trying to respect one another's freedom of thoughts. And quite frankly, I think that the campuses need a lot of work in this area, but I think everyone can also improve upon it, and trying not to be frustrated when someone disagrees, but sort of aiming towards a mutual understanding and not necessarily mutual agreement.
I think one of the most important things that I've really brought with me on campus and beyond in the work that I do is really just to follow Christ's commandment to love one another. And I think that that's gotten so polluted and perverted in modern society. But for me, what that really tends to look like is listening to people and understanding their stories and understanding their experiences and acknowledging that not the entire time is that going to agree with or affirm what I believe, and recognizing that life tends to be a little messier than one would like, and that all of our arguments are not necessarily ironclad in every sense of the word. And for me, at least, that's really just given me a lot of encouragement, and it's really inspired me to sort of focus on how, in the work that I do in education and beyond, sort of like how can I best serve all of these different people with all of these different experiences, to really bring all of them up and recognizing that each one of them has innate value in trying to truly find the good things about everyone I interact with, even if I disagree with them vehemently.
I am very honored to be on this panel because I am with some very smart individuals, and I love everything that they've said. I think if I were to add one more thing, it's that another way to think about Fidelity Month is a month of service. It's a month of service to your God, to your family, and to your country, to your community. And so my invitation would be to anyone on this call to consider how you can be of service to your God or your religion, your religious community, your family, or your local or national community. And I also had the thought that, well, we may not always like Disney for everything that they do. One thing they did very well was do a live action remake of Cinderella. And the reason why I like it so much is because Cinderella's catchphrase is, be kind and have courage. And I think that is exactly the message of Fidelity Month. And at least personally, that's what I'm taking away from it.
Well, we are almost at 8, so we can go ahead and wrap things up here. But I just wanted to thank all of you so much for joining Public Discourse for this conversation. Fidelity Month is something that's open to anyone who wants to join of any faith background, as I hope this call has illustrated. You can learn more about it at fidelitymonth.com. And I think Professor George, I would be remiss if I didn't mention something he's been tweeting about a lot, which is that tomorrow, June 30th, there will be a day of fasting in participation of Fidelity Month. So in accordance with whatever your faith tradition might be, those who are observing Fidelity Month will fast tomorrow. And I want to thank everybody for joining this call. I think everybody here has taught me a lot. I've learned a lot, and I hope that if nothing else, those who are listening have walked away with as much hope as I have after hearing from all these really bright young people. So thanks to our listeners, and thanks again to our panelists. We'll see you guys later.